Hey there, cats and kitties. I am the Blues Man, Johnny Blues. With this video, I'd like to say a few words about Canon. Canon in fandom. What does it mean? Should we really be taking it as hardcore as we are in fandom these days? Canon is something I first ran into when referencing the Sherlock Holmes stories. The original written works by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle had this big hardcover book comprising all of his original works. And so when I first ran into this term, the Sherlock Holmes canon, I didn't quite know what it meant. And of course, I've since run into this many, many times over the years between Star Trek, Doctor Who, comics continuity, and everything like that. Essentially, what we have with the term canon is a series of works, a body that exists within its own continuity, and everything outside of that does not conform to it. Essentially like with the Sherlock Holmes stories, the Sherlock Holmes canon is all of those original works as handed down by the originator, the creator. Everything outside of that, from movie adaptations to television series to other stories written by other writers, even the grandson of Arthur Conan Doyle, who has written some and co-written some further adventures, none of these things exist within that continuity. They are outside of that established canon. I've recently been talking back and forth between a fellow Superman fan, or at least he claims to be, who has referenced the term canon a few times in this debate we've had going back and forth. And the biggest problem I have with the comic book medium version of canon is there is no such thing. The comic book medium is a medium of reinvention. They continually update things and reinvent things and everything like that. Canon only can exist in the comic book form for brief stints when you look at the entire cumulative history of the stories from the Golden Age era up until to modern. When you look at Superman, you have Golden Age, Silver Age, you have the Post-Crisis era, you have the New 52. It's always shifting, always changing, always evolving. Same kind of sort of goes with Star Trek. Star Trek is a little more canon-based in that you have a pretty much solid continuity going from Enterprise to Voyager, as far as within the television series and even further in some of the films. And so there is a sort of loose sense of canon continuity. I think that's the biggest problem I have with this term canon, is it's too often confused with continuity. And people think that, well, it has to be then set in stone. If we look at the continuity, and this is how things are established, it can be unmoving, it can be unevolving, so we're going to make it canon. We're going to set it in stone. You cannot deviate from this. And that's the biggest problem I have, especially with a series like Doctor Who, and especially with comic book series. Doctor Who is a show that, it has a sort of canon to a degree, a continuity, but it doesn't have a canon in that everything that has been established has to remain concrete in stone and can never be wavered away from. All of these mediums, as we move on every single moment into the future, every step forward, with every second, every millisecond, stories are evolving, characters are moving forward, they're becoming something new than what they've been before. They're changing with the times. And if they don't do this, what can be said for these characters' longevity? That's the only reason why they're still around, because they're constantly adapting to the times and remaining within the relevance of the collective consciousness. This is something I brought up in a previous video. So in any case, when it comes to the term canon, I'm just really kind of sick of it being thrown around by these fanboys who use it as a bitching point to essentially say, that's why I think this movie sucks. It goes against canon. It goes against what's established. It goes against a certain continuity. And the fact of the matter is, that's all brouhaha. That's much ado about nothing, because, be a fan of whatever that stint of continuity of canon as you see it. Continue being a fan of that. That's not a problem. What is the problem is you can't see beyond it, and you can't evolve your own sensibilities beyond it as the characters are evolving. Man of Steel is a perfect sort of talking point about this, because people are saying that it is unrecognizably Superman. It's not the Superman they know. The Superman they may be most familiar with is anywhere from a nostalgic view to a specific stint of continuity within the comics, or it's the collective pop culture consciousness sort of vague version of what Superman is meant to be, without knowing all of the little aspects and all the little story tropes and things that they've explored within the comics that Man of Steel has only sort of reinterpreted. There's nothing original when you get down to the brass tacks of Man of Steel that we've never seen before. We've seen elements of it in the comics before. So for me, when somebody says it is not Superman, it just removed the essence of the character, it is unrecognizable, I have to say you got your head up your butt. And it's time to remove it. Otherwise, it's going to become a cancerous growth and, well, whatever suits you. When it comes to canon, it's gotten to the point where, here's how I feel about it. If you are so uptight and chip on your shoulder referring to canon as the end-all be-all, please suck on one at your nearest, earliest convenience, one that is soon to explode and will take your head with it, because it's just really annoying at this point. In all of these different fandoms, there is no sense of canon. There's continuity, and what there is of continuity only exists for brief stints of time. We cannot be obsessed with them. We cannot hold them up as the end-all, be-all. When it comes to Batman, look how many different versions of on-screen Batman there have been. Look at how many different versions of Batman have been interpreted in the comics. Not any single one of them is more important, more valid, more canonized than the rest. Look at Sherlock Holmes, as I mentioned before. All of the original Conan Doyle works are a masterpiece as far as I'm concerned. They waver from, some are not as good as others, and some are the really cream of the crop stories. But one thing that came out during the 70s was Nicholas Meyer, someone who has directed 2 of the Star Trek feature films, of course, prior to J.J. Abrams. He has written 3 novellas that exist within the continuity of Sherlock Holmes. Of course, they are not respectably canon for those who are sticklers. But, for example, those who may not know, Arthur Conan Doyle wanted to kill off Sherlock Holmes after a while because he got tired of writing the character. And what he did for one story was he had to meet his arch-nemesis, Professor Moriarty, and they both fell to their penultimate doom at the end of Reichenbach Falls. Later, he was basically convinced by the uproarious reaction by his fans to resurrect Holmes in a very creative way. I won't say how exactly he did. And there was really sort of John H. Watson, his best buddy and chronicler, came up with a reason, and Nicholas Meyer wrote this book that basically filled in the gap with something else entirely, turning Sherlock Holmes not so much into having an arch-nemesis that was Moriarty, but because of his cocaine addiction, which was something that was very prevalent for the character, he believed he needed that to give him, creative juices in basically investigating cases and stuff like that. This story reworked that whole sort of aspect of the character where it was a cocaine-induced dream that Moriarty was actually so profoundly his arch-nemesis. Turned out that Moriarty was actually his tutor as a child and may or may not, I don't want to spoil the story, but may or may not have had relations with a parent. And this is why in Holmes's state of delusion under the influence of this narcotic, as the story explains, it was a very creative way of saying, in a sense, in Holmes' mind, Moriarty was his arch-nemesis, but for different reasons than what you thought if you read the original canon. And so, I think there's something to be said for breaking beyond this sense of canon as concrete, end-all, be-all, cannot be deviated from. And I think, if you're really going to, as I say, have a chip on your shoulder and be obsessed with that term and unmoving from it, just suck on one, please, at your earliest convenience, or at least shut the hell up. And so, I'd love to hear from you guys in the comments below your thoughts on canon in fandom as opposed to continuity and the shifting, evolving, always reinterpreting stories and stuff like that and characters as we see it, as we move ever forward into the future from here on after. And I hope this video finds you well, and I'll catch you all later. Peace.